The honeymoon suite cost more per night than my parents made in a month, and still that was the moment my life started to fall apart. The hotel manager didn't even look at me like a guest, he looked at me like a warning. "Ma'am, is that man your husband?" he asked, glancing over my shoulder at Daniel like he wasn't supposed to be there. I smiled and said yes because that's what you say on your honeymoon. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "You need to come with me." And I remember my hands going cold before my brain even understood why. Minutes later, standing in a locked office with a folder of photos in front of me, I forgot how to breathe. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to your heart, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I read every single one and it reminds me I wasn't as alone as I thought. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 31 years old, and this is the night I realized the man I married might not be who he said he was, and that everything I believed about my own family was built on something I never questioned until it was too late. But this didn't start in a luxury resort in Bora Bora, with ocean water so clear it didn't even look real. It started months earlier in a place that felt a lot less like a dream and a lot more like a performance I didn't realize I'd been cast in. When I met Daniel Hayes, he walked into my life like someone who already knew exactly what I needed before I did. He was calm, confident, the kind of man who opened doors without making it a big deal and listened like every word I said actually mattered. And after years of being the overlooked daughter in a family that always had someone more important to focus on, that feeling hit harder than I want to admit. My parents barely reacted when I told them I was seeing someone serious. My mom just nodded and asked what he did for a living like that was the only detail worth knowing, and my younger sister Lauren didn't even look up. From her phone she just said, "Another one?" Like I was a joke she'd heard too many times before. That was normal for us. I was used to being the background, the safe one, the one who didn't cause problems and didn't get attention, so when Daniel started showing up in ways no one else ever had, I didn't question it, I held on to it. He planned everything, dinners, trips, even the proposal, which happened on a private beach at sunset with a photographer hidden somewhere I never saw. And for the first time in my life my family paid attention, but not to me, to him. My dad suddenly cared, asking about investments and connections. My mom started smiling more, introducing him to friends like she'd found something valuable, and my sister, who had never once asked me about my relationships, suddenly wanted to know everything, not about how I felt but about what Daniel owned, where he traveled, who he knew. It should have felt like approval, but something about it didn't sit right, like I had been invisible until I became attached to someone they found impressive, and even then I wasn't the focus, he was. I remember one dinner 2 weeks before the wedding, my father raising his glass and saying, "You did well this time, Emily. Not congratulations, not I'm happy for you, just that, like I had finally made a choice that reflected well on them," and everyone laughed softly like it was harmless, but I felt it settle somewhere deep, that familiar feeling of not quite belonging even in my own life. I ignored it because I wanted this to work. I wanted something that was mine, something that didn't feel like I had to earn it just to keep it, and Daniel made it easy to believe that. There were moments though, small ones, that didn't fit, like how he would change the subject whenever I asked about his past, or how he never mentioned old friends or family, and once late at night I saw his phone light up with a message. He turned away from me too quickly, but when I asked he just smiled and said it was nothing, and I let it go because everything else felt so right. That's the thing about something that feels perfect, you don't go looking for cracks, you tell yourself they're not there. So we got married, a small ceremony by the ocean, white flowers, soft music, everything exactly how I imagined it, and for a few hours I let myself believe this was the start of something stable, something real, something that couldn't be taken away or twisted or ignored. I didn't know that less than 24 hours later, standing barefoot on marble floors in a resort thousands of miles from home, a stranger would look at me like I was in danger, and for the first time since I met my husband, I would start to wonder if everyone else saw something I didn't. I did not say anything when the manager closed the door behind us. I just stood there staring at the folder he placed on the desk like it was something alive, something I should not touch, and he did not rush me, he just said quietly, "Take your time," like he had seen this moment happen before. My hands were shaking when I opened it, not dramatically, just enough that I had to steady the edge of the paper with my thumb, and the first thing I saw was a photograph of a woman standing in front of a hotel pool, smiling the way people smile when they think they are safe, and for a second I thought it was just some mistake, like maybe this was about someone else, but then I saw the date in the corner, 3 years ago, and underneath it, a name I did not recognize, followed by a line that made my stomach drop. Last seen with Daniel Hayes. I looked up at the manager, expecting him to correct me, to tell me there had been some misunderstanding, but he did not. He just nodded once and said, There are 3 more. I flipped the page and there was another woman, different place, same kind of smile, same line underneath, and then another and another for women, all connected to the same man I had married less than 24 hours ago. I remember saying, this does not make sense, more to myself than to him, because it did not. Daniel was not careless, he was not reckless, he was the most controlled person I had ever met, and nothing about him felt like chaos, but this was chaos. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice even though we were alone. We do not report things like this unless there is a pattern, he said. And with him there is a pattern. I felt something shift inside me, not fear exactly, not yet, more like a crack in something I had been standing on, something I thought was solid and suddenly it was not. Why are you telling me this? I asked, because that was the only question that mattered, and he hesitated just for a second before saying, because you are still here. Those words landed harder than anything else because I understood what he meant without him explaining it. The others were not here anymore. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him like distance could make it less real and said, you are wrong. Because I needed him to be wrong, I needed this to be something explainable, something simple, but he did not argue, he just looked at me in a way that felt almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. Has he told you about his previous marriages? He asked, and I shook my head before I could stop myself because the truth was, Daniel had never talked about anyone before me. Not seriously, not in detail, and I had never pushed because I thought that meant he was focused on us, on the future, not the past. The manager nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something, and then he said, Ma'am, I cannot tell you what to do, but I would not go back to that room alone. I felt my chest tighten at that because until that moment I had not considered that going back could be a risk. It was just where my things were, where my husband was, but now it felt different, like stepping into something I did not fully understand. I stood there for a second longer, trying to think clearly, trying to hold on to the version of Daniel I knew, the one who made me coffee every morning, the one who remembered small details I forgot, the one who looked at me like I mattered, and I held on to that as hard as I could because the alternative was too big, too fast. I need to talk to him, I said finally, because that felt like the only logical step, and the manager did not stop me, he just said, then do not let him know what you have seen. That part stayed with me as I walked out of the office, back into the bright, open lobby where everything looked normal, people laughing, checking in, taking pictures, and I felt completely out of place, like I was carrying something invisible that no one else could see. When I got back to our suite, the door was slightly open, just enough to notice, and for a second I told myself it was housekeeping, that it was nothing, but when I stepped inside, the room was quiet in a way that felt wrong, too still, and Daniel was not there. His suitcase was open on the bed, his watch was missing from the nightstand, and his phone, the one he never went anywhere without, was gone. I stood there in the middle of the room listening to nothing, and that was the moment the fear finally settled in, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady and cold, because for the first time since I met him, I did not know where my husband was, and I was not sure I wanted to find out. I did not move for a long time, I just stood there in the middle of the room staring at the open suitcase like it might explain something if I looked at it long enough. But it did not, it just sat there, half unpacked, like he had been in the middle of something and then suddenly was not. I walked over slowly, careful, like I was stepping into a space that did not belong to me anymore. And I noticed things I had not paid attention to before. His clothes were folded too neatly. Not like someone on vacation, more like someone who needed everything in place, and the zipper compartment inside the suitcase was open just enough for me to see a stack of documents tucked inside. I should not have looked, I knew that. But I had already seen too much to pretend everything was normal, so I reached in and pulled them out, my hand steady now in a way that surprised me, like something in me had shifted from confusion to focus. The first page was not personal, not letters or photos, it was official, printed, structured with headings and numbers, and I recognized the format immediately because my father used to work in finance. It looked like a report, but not the kind you show clients, the kind you keep hidden. There were names, dates, locations, and every name matched one from the folder the manager had shown me, every single one. I felt my throat tighten as I flipped through the pages, expecting to find something that would clear him, something that would make sense of this, but instead I found more connections, more details, places I had never heard him mention, timelines that overlapped with moments he had told me he was somewhere else. You are overthinking, I whispered to myself, repeating the same words I had used months ago when I noticed the first small inconsistencies, when he would step outside to take calls, when he would come back and say it was work, when he would change the subject so smoothly I almost forgot I had asked anything at all. I wanted that version of reality back, the simple one, the one where my husband was just private, not secretive, but standing there with those papers in my hands, it felt impossible to hold on to. I set the documents down on the bed and stepped back, my heart starting to beat faster now, not out of panic, but out of something sharper, something more alert, like my body had finally caught up to what my mind was trying to process. I walked to the balcony and pushed the glass door open, needing air, needing something real, and the ocean stretched out in front of me, calm and endless, people laughing down by the pool, music playing softly from somewhere below, and it all felt wrong, like I was standing in the middle of a postcard while something underneath it was breaking apart. I pulled out my phone and stared at Daniel's contact, my thumb hovering over the call button, and for a second I almost pressed it, almost chose the version of me that would confront him directly, that would demand answers and believe whatever he told me. But then I heard the manager's voice again, quiet but clear. Do not let him know what you have seen. That stopped me. I lowered my hand slowly, realizing that if any part of this was true, if even a fraction of what I had just seen connected to him the way it looked like it did, then calling him without understanding more would not protect me, it would expose me. That thought settled into place in a way that felt cold but steady, and I realized I needed to think differently now, not like a wife, but like someone who might be in the middle of something she did not control. I went back inside and closed the balcony door, the quiet returning instantly, and I noticed something else then, something small but impossible to ignore. The closet door was slightly open, just enough to catch my eye. I walked over slowly and pushed it open the rest of the way, and inside, hanging neatly among the clothes I had seen him pack, was a jacket I did not recognize, darker, heavier, not something he had worn since we arrived, and when I reached into the pocket, my fingers brushed against something metallic, smooth and unfamiliar, and I froze, not pulling it out, just holding it there for a second as a thought crossed my mind that I could not ignore anymore. I did not actually know this man, not in the way I thought I did, not in the way you are supposed to know someone you trust with your life, and for the first time since I said yes to him, I felt something I had never felt before, not doubt, not confusion, but distance, like the person I married and the person whose things I was standing among were not the same, and I had no idea which one was real. I did not pull the object out of the pocket right away, I just stood there with my fingers resting against it, feeling the shape without seeing it, because somehow that felt safer, like as long as I did not look I could still pretend this was all a misunderstanding, but that illusion was already slipping and I knew it. Slowly I pulled it out, careful, deliberate, and what I found was not what I expected, not something obviously dangerous, not something I could immediately label. It was a small metal badge, plain at first glance, but when I turned it toward the light, I saw engraved text and a symbol I recognized but could not place right away, something official, something that did not belong to a normal life, and underneath it, a name that was not Daniel Hayes. I stared at it, reading it again, making sure I was not misreading, but it stayed the same, a different name, a different identity, and for a second my mind went completely blank, like it refused to process what that meant because the implication was too big, too fast. I placed the badge on the dresser carefully, like it might disappear if I moved too quickly, and stepped back, trying to connect everything I had seen, the photos, the reports, the missing details in his past, the way he controlled every conversation about where he had been and who he knew, and none of it pointed in one clear direction. It split into two, and I did not know which one was real. Either the man I married had been lying to me about everything, or there was something else happening that I was not supposed to understand. I pressed my hands against the edge of the dresser, grounding myself, and forced my breathing to slow, because panic was not going to help me now, not when I needed to think clearly for the first time since this started. Then I heard the door. It was not loud, just the soft click of the handle turning, but it cut through everything, and my body reacted before my mind did. I grabbed the badge and slipped it back into the pocket of the jacket just as the door opened fully. Daniel stepped inside like nothing was wrong, like this was just another moment in a normal day, his expression calm, his movement steady, and for a second I almost believed it again. Almost let myself fall back into the version of reality where everything made sense. "Hey," he said, his voice warm, familiar, like it always was, and he walked toward me, closing the distance like he always did, like there was nothing between us. I forced myself to stay still, to not step back, to not show anything, because I remembered what the manager said, do not let him know what you have seen, and now that felt more important than ever. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice even, casual, like I had not just turned his life inside out in my head. He smiled slightly, the same easy smile that had made everything feel simple before, and said, "Just took a walk, needed some air." Like that was all it was, like there was nothing behind it. I nodded, mirroring his calm even though inside everything felt off balance, and I watched him closely now, really watched him in a way I had not before. Noticing the small things, the way his eyes moved around the room before settling on me, the way his hand lingered on the back of a chair like he was checking something without making it obvious. "You okay?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. And I realized then that he was watching me too, measuring my reactions, looking for something. "Yeah," I said, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the details in his expression, the familiar ones, the ones I trusted, and for a second I hated how convincing they still were, how easy it would be to believe him if I let myself. "You should get some rest," he said softly, reaching out and brushing his fingers lightly against my arm, a gesture that used to feel comforting, but now made me hyper-aware of every movement, every intention. I nodded again, stepping slightly away under the excuse of moving toward the bed, creating just enough space to think. "I might take a shower," I added, keeping my tone steady, and he nodded like that was completely normal. "I will order us something to eat," he said, already turning toward his phone, and I watched him for a second longer before walking into the bathroom and closing the door behind me. The moment it clicked shut, I leaned against it, my breath finally breaking into something uneven, because now I knew two things for sure: he had lied to me, and he was still lying, and whatever the truth was, I was standing right in the middle of it with no idea which version of him was real. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I needed to, not because I was showering, but because I needed the noise of the running water to cover the sound of my thoughts, because everything felt too loud inside my head, every detail, every memory, every small moment I had ignored now pushing forward like they had been waiting for this exact moment to be seen clearly. I turned on the shower but did not step in right away. I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to recognize the person looking back at me, because she looked the same, but everything underneath felt different, like I had crossed into a version of my life where nothing could go back to what it was before. I replayed everything, the photos, the reports, the badge with a different name, and then his face when he walked in, calm, steady, controlled, and that was what stayed with me the most. Not fear, not guilt, just control. That was not the reaction of someone caught off guard. That was the reaction of someone used to managing situations, used to adjusting quickly, and that realization settled into me slowly like something locking into place. I stepped into the shower finally, letting the water hit my shoulders, grounding me, giving me something physical to focus on, because I needed to make a decision, not later, not after more thinking, but now, while I still had some control over what happened next. I could confront him directly, demand the truth, force everything into the open, but something about that felt wrong, not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I did not know what version of the truth he would give me, and for the first time I did not trust that his words would match reality. The other option was to keep going, to act like nothing had changed, to stay in the role I had been playing since the moment I met him, the trusting wife, the one who did not question too deeply, and use that to understand more before making any move, and that option felt colder, less emotional, but more certain. I turned off the water and wrapped a towel around myself, my decision already made even if I had not said it out loud. I was not going to confront him yet, I was going to watch, listen, and wait. When I stepped back into the room, the atmosphere felt almost normal again. Daniel was sitting at the small table by the window, scrolling through his phone, 2 plates of food already set out, like this was just another quiet evening. And for a second I saw exactly how easy it would be to slip back into that version of reality, to sit down, eat, laugh, pretend none of this existed, but I did not let myself. "You ordered already?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual, like I had not spent the last 20 minutes reconstructing everything I thought I knew about him. He looked up and smiled, that same familiar expression. "I figured you would be hungry," he said. And there it was again, that attention to detail, that ability to anticipate, something that used to feel like care but now felt calculated. I sat across from him, picking up my fork, forcing myself to eat even though my appetite was gone, because normal behavior was part of the plan now, and I needed him to believe nothing had changed. "So what did you do before we met?" I asked suddenly, the question coming out smoother than I expected, like it had been waiting there. He paused just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it, I was watching for it now, and then he leaned back slightly, considering. "Consulting mostly," he said, vague, non-specific, the same answer he had given me before, but this time it did not pass unnoticed. "For who?" I asked, keeping my voice even, not pushing too hard, just enough to see where he would go. He smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes the same way this time. "Different clients, it depended," he said, and then he shifted the conversation, asking me about the view, the resort, anything to move away from the question, and I let him because I was not trying to corner him, not yet. I was trying to understand the pattern. The rest of the meal passed in that same controlled rhythm, him leading the conversation, me following just enough to keep everything steady, but inside I was tracking everything, every pause, every deflection, every moment where his answers felt just a little too smooth. After we finished, he stood and walked over to the balcony, stepping outside, taking his phone with him, and I watched him through the glass, noticing how his posture changed slightly, how his expression shifted when he thought I was not looking, more focused, more alert, like the version of him I had seen for a split second earlier, the one that did not match the man I married. That was when it clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough to change everything. Whatever Daniel was, whatever he was involved in, it was bigger than just a hidden past, bigger than a few missing details, and I was not just his wife in this moment. I was part of something I did not understand yet, and if I was going to get through it, I needed to stop thinking like someone who trusted him and start thinking like someone who did not. 3 months later, I wake up in my own apartment in San Diego, sunlight coming through the window without permission, quiet and ordinary, and for the first time in a long time, I do not feel like I am waiting for something to go wrong. Daniel is not in my life anymore, not in the way he was, and the truth, the full truth, came out in a way I never could have predicted that night. He was not the man the manager believed he was, and he was not the man I thought I married either. He was something in between, someone living inside a reality that required secrets, false names, and controlled distance, and the women in those photos were not victims in the way I feared. They were people he had helped disappear for their own safety, people who needed to vanish to survive something far worse than being misunderstood. The reports, the badge, the lies, they all made sense eventually, but understanding it did not make it easier, because the hardest part was not the fear, it was realizing that trust without truth is not love, it is dependence. And I had built my entire sense of safety on something I never questioned deeply enough. We ended things quietly, no drama, no explosion, just a conversation where he finally told me everything he could. And I realized that even if his reasons were justified, the life he lived was not one I could stay in without losing myself. So I left, not because I stopped caring, but because I started caring about myself more. My family still does not fully understand what happened, and maybe they never will, but for the first time their approval does not define my choices, and that alone feels like freedom I did not know I needed. If you are listening to this and you feel like something in your life does not fully make sense, like you are explaining away things that your instincts keep questioning, I want you to know that clarity is not something you owe anyone else, it is something you owe yourself, and walking away from something confusing is not weakness, it is self-respect. You do not have to stay in a situation just because it looks perfect from the outside. And you do not have to prove your worth by enduring uncertainty. Thank you for staying with me through this story, truly, because telling it out loud means I am no longer carrying it alone. And maybe you are not either. I would love to know, have you ever trusted someone completely, only to realize later you did not have the full truth, and how did you handle it? And if this story truly resonates with you, you can like and subscribe, but only if it speaks to your heart. My name is Emily Carter, I am 31 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this. Never ignore the quiet voice inside you just to keep something that does not feel fully real.